Good evening. I don't think this mic is on. Maybe it is. It is? Okay. I can't hear me, which is good. That's good. That's good to know. Well, announcement wise, there's not a whole lot of announcements other than if you haven't already received a card, Sandy's mailed out some cards inviting you to our church wide fellowship. We're not going out to Magnolia Branch, we're going to have it back here, but that's going to be August 2nd, which is not this coming up Sunday evening, but the Sunday evening after that. Hamburgers, hot dogs, and stuff like that. Hopefully, it'll be cool. It's not going to be till 6 o'clock, so hopefully it'll be a little bit cooler. But be on the lookout for that. Other than that, does anybody have any announcements I'm forgetting? Oh, Davison, if you saw the slide Sunday, Davison Carter is going to be ordained to the gospel ministry Sunday at 2 o'clock. And no, that is going to be at Fountain. It's going to be at Fountain, and that's the actual service. He's already had the ordination council and everything. That will be this coming up Sunday. Will be the ordination service at Fountain. Thank you. All right. Well, tonight we're going to be in Psalm 45. What song or songs were played at your wedding? The bridal march? Yeah. I can't really remember what song was played at ours either. I know my sister sang. It was, don't tell Rochelle I don't remember. I remember my sister saying because she was 7 months pregnant and she was supposed to sing, and the minister was supposed to say a line, and then she would start singing. But he started talking, and he started getting this confused look on his face, and then all of a sudden it dawned on him. He said, "Gypsy," you know. So we still laugh about that, but I don't remember what the song was. But the reason we're talking about that is this is possibly, as you can see, your little title might say a royal wedding song. Why would a royal wedding song be found in the Psalms? Um, why would a royal wedding song? And yours might not say it because it's one of those things that whoever put the Bible together just stuck that in there. That's a general designation of what a lot of people think it is. If you look at the subscription, which also it was added later by whoever compiled the Psalms, like back in ancient Hebrew history, it says, for the choir director, according to the lilies, a maskil of the sons of Korah, a love song. Or yours might say, instead of according to the lilies, it might say according to Shoshanim. That's some differences of opinion on which that should say. But either way, it has a lot of stuff in there. For the choir director, why would they continually sing? For the choir director meant it was a temple song. They sang it when they went to the temple. Why would they sing a temple song that is about possibly a wedding? It seems that even if it was originally written for the case of a wedding, it eventually became more of a worship song. A worship song, not in the sense that they continue to celebrate the king's wedding, but it's a messianic song. It ends up pointing to Jesus, and so they would read it or they would understand it and sing it in light of that. It says a maskil. A maskil is usually a chanted song. It's a meditative song where they would meditate on the words, like very meditative in nature. It's of the sons of Korah, like several of them the last few weeks have been. And then it says it's a love song, indicating what type of song it was. So where did this psalm come from? Where was the original setting? What was the initial setting? How many of you are very familiar with Psalm 45, by the way? Any Psalm 45 scholars? I was hoping somebody would be a Psalm 45 scholar. They think that this was, especially because of the first couple of verses, they think that this was written by a poet laureate. A poet laureate is somebody that is hired, especially within kingdoms, that would write what's going on in the king's life, would write songs for all occasions, or write poems for those occasions. And here the occasion is a wedding, which seems pretty apparent as you go through it and you read the song. Now, what king this was, it isn't said. Some people think that it's Solomon. He had a foreign wife and he had close connections with Tyre, which is in there. But he wasn't really the warrior that is described in here, so we don't know if that makes sense. And for that matter, Matthew 12:42 says that one comes after Solomon is greater than he. So even if it was written about Solomon, then that just continually emphasizes the point that it ends up being a messianic song. Others think that perhaps it was Ahab and Jezebel that it's talking about when they were married. It talks about the daughters of Tyre, and Jezebel was a Tyrian princess. It talks about having an ivory house. And in 1 Kings 22:39, it talks about how Ahab had an ivory palace. So maybe it fits in. But if that's the case, then this was written and it became more meditative in the sense of rather than prescribing this is how the king acted, it was prescribing this is how a king should act. And consequently, it was later sung to say, hey, look, don't be like Ahab. Because Ahab was anything but righteous and just. He didn't live up to he did not ride deeds of truth and meekness of justice. Jezebel did not forget her father's house like it's told the bride is supposed to do later down in here. So if it was written about them, then it was later sung as a reminder of what should be, not what actually was. But regardless of what it is, it models royal behavior. This is what a good king does. This is what is just and right. So even though it later became a messianic psalm, as Jesus is both God and man, and there's a reason those two are tied together, and there also we'll get to here in a moment. Every time they saw a king, whether it was Ahab and Jezebel, or even if it was Solomon or whoever it was, every time they were told what is a good king, and they would see the earthly failings, then it would inspire them, and they would look towards that future king. They would look in hope and in anticipation to that eschatological king, if you will. In Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 4, it says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord shine over you. For look, darkness will cover the earth, and total darkness the peoples. But the Lord will shine over you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to your shining brightness. Raise your eyes and look around. They all gather and come to you. Your sons will come from far away, and your daughters on the hips of nursing mothers." And they would look with anticipation when that would happen, whenever basically eschatologically it would come through. There's also, though, how many times can you think of in the Old Testament or New Testament when our relationship with God is related to a marriage? Does that ever happen? It does. I feel like, okay, I'm sorry. I felt like a little kids teacher then. Does that ever happen? Because obviously the answer is yes, and y'all know that. But in the Old Testament, in Hosea 1 and 2, of course, Hosea, that poor guy, he was told to, Cole and I were talking earlier today about Hosea and about, have y'all ever heard E.K. Bailey's sermon, The Preacher and the Hoochie? E.K. Bailey, if you look it up on YouTube, it's an interesting sermon. He's an African-American pastor, and he goes through Hosea with his wife accompanying him, and it's kind of a presentation kind of thing the preacher in the Hoochie. Poor Hosea, and his marriage was to model our relationship with God and how the nation of Israel was sinful and rebelled and played the harlot with other nations, but yet he loved her and took her back again. So there in Hosea, it is in Ezekiel 16, in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23 and following, we're called the bride of Christ. In Revelations 19, our relationship with Christ is the bride of Christ, is the church. And so even this being a wedding song, much like the Song of Solomon. How many of you know why the Song of Solomon's in the Bible? I'm looking for scholars again. Because the Song of Solomon, it is not often preached. In fact, it's my intention to preach through all 66 books of the Bible here at Eastwood. But guess which one might be the last one? The Song of Solomon. It's kind of one of those where, like, why is it in the Bible? It's like this song, we could be, why is this wedding song in the Bible? The relationship between us and God can be identified. And as much as I lament and won't sing and dislike some music, because it seems a whole lot like it's like, is that about us and God or us and our boyfriend? Or, is it, what's the relationship there? The Bible makes use of that imagery to where we are a bride of Christ, where we have that marriage relationship. And so even though this is a wedding song, if it originally applied to a king and a queen, eventually it became seen as All Kings Fail, a messianic song, and the hope in the future that Christ ultimately fulfilled. And so we can look at it and we can see in its relationship both his greatness and our role and what it is that we could be doing. So with all that said, and that is a rather lengthy introduction, let's look at Psalm 45. My heart is moved by a noble theme as I recite my verses to the king. My tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. You are the most handsome of men. Grace flows from your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. So in those verses, we're introduced to the poet laureate. He says that his heart is moved, or his heart is bubbling over. He is astir with this noble theme, thinking about the king and his bride. And as he recites his works or verses to the king, he compares his tongue as the pen of a skillful writer. And so as he sets that up, he starts off giving the praise to the king that we're familiar with. You are the most handsome of men, grace flows from you. Like he's propping up the king, like, long live the queen, or is it the king? The king, may he live forever. Not just introductions, though, but I think it is authentic, it is true. Although Jesus was said that he was not a form or fashion where he stood out necessarily, we know that Christ, the risen Lord, is winsome. He is not just physically appealing, but he is desirable, and he is the most of any. It says grace flows from your lips. Now, just about every single translation says something different there. Is it poured on your lips? Does it flow from your lips? Is it poured into your lips? All of these are different ways that they say it. But behind it all is the idea that what he has is from God, and it is God's grace that is flowing into and then out of him. And the imagery also of if you think about being poured out, as David was anointed, Saul was anointed, the kings were anointed of God as God showed his favor upon them. It says, therefore, God has blessed you forever. In the second section, verses 3 through 9, it says, mighty warrior, strap your sword at your side in your majesty and splendor. In your splendor, ride triumphantly in the cause of truth, humility, and justice. May your right hand show your awe-inspiring acts. Your sharpened arrows pierce the hearts of the king's enemies. The peoples fall under you. So that's one reason it seems difficult to call it Solomon, because Solomon was not a warrior king. For that matter, Ahab had more political alliances. And even Christ doesn't use swords unless you count the sword of the Spirit and the arrows of his right hand, the sharpened arrows. We know that God is triumphant. Jesus is triumphant. He fights our battles for us. He is the God that is overcome evil, overcome sin, overcome Satan, overcome death, overcome the grave, overcome everything. He is triumphant. Your throne, now verse 6. Verse 6 is one that is, well, let's read it and then we'll go through it. Your throne, God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is a scepter of justice. Now, taken as is, we think that it's just shifted from talking about the king to God. But it seems like here it is calling the king God, which doesn't fit. It says, you love righteousness and hate wickedness, therefore God, your God. So your throne, God, therefore God, your God. At that point, we question what's going on here. The Egyptians thought that the Pharaoh was God. But in the Hebrew Bible, we recognize God as only God. And kings were not known to be deities. But yet, it's also not completely foreign. If you look at Psalm 82, it says, I said, you are gods, you are sons of the Most High. However, you will die like humans and fall like any other ruler. So there is a psalm saying you are gods. Also in John, it says, if he called those to whom the word of God came gods, and the scripture cannot be broken. So here the context is he's calling those that receive the word of God, he's calling them gods, little g gods. And then in Hebrews 1:8 it says, but to the Son, your throne, God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is a scepter of justice. So the idea of little g gods isn't saying that they are equal to or identical with God, the only God. I like how one translation kind of tweaked it a little bit, but I think it gets to the point. The REV says, God has enthroned you for all eternity. Once again, pointing not your throne, God, is forever and ever, but instead God has made your throne forever and ever, which is, I think, results back to it being of God's doing. No. Hebrews 1:8. I already read that verse, but that is actually a quotation from Psalm 45:6. And Hebrews identified this as a messianic psalm because it took that verse right there and applied it to Jesus. In Hebrews, they were talking about how Jesus is superior to the angels, and it used this psalm as evidence or as support for Jesus being even more important than the angels or being above the angels. So that's another indicator that it is a messianic psalm. He said, you love righteousness and hate wickedness. This is still talking about the king. A just king has the same attributes as God, has the same loves and hates as God. Therefore, God your God has anointed you with the oil of joy more than your companions. Myrrh, aloes, and cassia perfume are your garments. From ivy, palaces, harps bring you joy. Myrrh, aloes, those are also found in Song of Solomon 4:14. They're the perfumes, like basically saying, how many of you, and I don't think anybody is because I didn't smell anybody, but how many of you are sitting next to somebody that was a little heavy on the Avon? Have y'all ever sat next to somebody? Yeah, that's a little heavy on the whatever evening Paris or whatever it is. They can pour it on. Well, here that's saying it here, but it's a good thing. It's a good smell. I don't know what your favorite perfume or cologne or whatever it is, but here it's a good smell. And with this 100-degree weather, remember they didn't have deodorant, so perfume might have been a good thing back in those days. But here the myrrh, the aloes, the perfumes, the ivory palaces. The ivory palaces, if the palace is laced with ivory, then it's going to be, think about the contents, the inside is going to be wonderful as well. So here are the affluences there. King's daughters are among your honored women. The queen adorned with gold from Ophir stands at your right hand. The king's daughters, that means like, it could mean the harem. I mean, if you think about Solomon, he had a harem that's saying even prominence of king's daughters are among your honored women. But regardless of what was going on there, we know that even those around him, even those in his household, or honored or of magnificence. So that if being messianic, I don't think that the king's daughters are among your honored women. It's talking about a harem. It's talking about those maybe like the 10 maidens that were in the New Testament. The ten maidens that were part of the wedding procession, that half of them forgot to trim their lamps. They didn't have the oil. It could be pointing to those, like basically these 10 bridesmaids. Even the bridesmaids, we're not dealing with just your old good friends. We're talking about king's daughters. The importance and the majesty is hard to underscore. The queen adorned with gold. Solomon said in 1 Kings 2:19, Bathsheba went to King Solomon, and the king said, "Put her down a throne. Put down a throne for the king's mother." So she sat at his right hand, much like the queen here, who was adorned with gold from Ophir, which is one of those, we think of the cedars of Lebanon. Evidently, Ophir had the best gold, the 24 carats, or I don't know what, but for some reason they were known to have the gold that was, once again, the best of the best. He then transitions, though, after verse 9, he's applauding, he's lauding, he's making very much of the king, saying what is just, saying what is right for the king to be and to do. He then transitions to the bride. In verse 10, it says, "Listen, daughter, pay attention and consider. Forget your people in your father's house, and the king will desire your beauty. Bow down to him, for he is your Lord. The daughter of Tyre, that the wealthy people will seek you with favor, with gifts." So as she is told to forget her father's house, that's to deny the previous claims. That's to lay aside the old for what is new. If it is Jezebel did not leave her father's gods and continued to worship them and led Ahab and the nation of Israel astray. But like, if you look at it in the Christian world sense, whenever we go to Christ, we leave what once was to become what is new. And so the imagery of leaving and forsaking what you've known, what you've had, for the sake of what is to come. It says also, and the king's desire for your beauty. One way that this is looked at least with the commentators that I saw, think about our sanctification. Does it delight God? Are we able to delight God? I think so. I think so too. I think God delights in the praises of his people. God delights in a cheerful giver. God delights whenever we choose him, whenever we do what is right, whenever we follow closely after him. And so just as here the bride is doing something that the king delights, I think God delights whenever we are surrendered wholly to him, whenever we do leave behind the sinful ways of the world and follow hard after him. And once again, the daughter of Tyre, the wealthy people seek favor with gifts. That's all going back to everything in abundance. Even the world noticing as Christians. In the last section, in 13, it says, or it's not the last section, but in 13 through 15, it says, "In her chamber the royal daughter is all glorious, her clothing embroidered with gold. In colorful garments she is led to the king. After her, the virgins, her companions, are brought to you. They are led in with gladness and rejoicing. They enter the king's palace." Thinking back once again to the New Testament with the procession that was taking place. We think of if you're standing down here, they're going to throw open the doors, in walks the bride in the dress, They would have had where she would have gone a lot bigger distance than that, like from household to household, with her maidens that would have possibly been lighting the way with the lamp in a formal ceremony. There's also other ceremonies which they go and make much of the groom, but anyway, that's here the procession is she is going along with her companions, and as they go, they are doing so how? With gladness and rejoicing. As Christians, we go before Christ. It's important for us to find our identity in Christ also. Think about that as he takes us as his bride, we have a new identity. We have a value that is placed upon us by him. We have a identity that is found in him. It is one that should cause us to rejoice. The Bible talks about the church being prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband, and that Christ Himself would present us as a pure bride for her husband. And so, us as Christians, we need to think about that. We need to think about both our disposition, our attitudes, what we think about, the rejoicing that we have to going and being with God, the responsibilities and the joys that come with it. And then in the last section, it says, "Your sons will succeed your ancestors. You will make them princes throughout the land. I will cause your name to be remembered for all generations. Therefore, the peoples will praise you forever and ever." Sons made princes. Listen to a few verses from Hebrews. "For in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was entirely appropriate that God, for whom and through whom all things exist, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through sufferings." That's Christ bringing sons and daughters to glory. "Again, I will trust in Him, and again I am with the children God gave me." God, once again, bringing along the sons and daughters. In Revelation 6:10, they cried out with a loud voice, "Lord, the one who is holy and true, how long until you judge those who live on the earth and avenge our blood?" I copied the wrong verse because it talks about us reigning with Him and having not only our identity found in Him, but also our future found in Him. Here, the sons succeed the ancestors, the name remembered, and the peoples praise you forever and ever. Because of what Christ has done, He's worthy of praise. Because of what Christ has done, we have a future, we have an identity, we have everything, all because of Him. So for us, as we look at this psalm, we look at it and we think about our relationship with Christ. We think about He is the good King, the King that does not fail, the King that has grace flowing from His lips, the King that is the majestic warrior, the King that is triumphant and splendid, the King that pierces the hearts even of enemies. We think about His throne being forever and ever. His kingdom is one of justice, of righteousness. We think of the King and we think of His majesty. We think of the palaces of ivory, the perfumes. We think of everything. And then we think of who we are in relation to Him. That He would choose us. That He would love us. That He would take us to be His very own. And it should bring about inside of us that same gladness and that same rejoicing. It should be about, this is probably stretching the analogy, but how many of you ladies that stressed for a long time about a wedding dress? And exactly what the veil was going to be and all of that other stuff. Think about how much preparation goes into picking the right flowers and into picking the right music and into picking who's going to be there and who's going to sit where and everything that goes with our wedding. That same analogy could work for us as we think about and we prepare our relationship with God. As we think about it and think about it in rejoicing. As we are so concerned with not losing 5 pounds so that the dress fits better, but losing those few extra sins so that we are more radiant. Losing those few extra things that would hinder us. Making sure we practice walking in our adorned clothes so that we don't trip. So that we are presented in all as wonderfully as we can before our groom, who is Christ. So as we look at Psalm 45, we might say, why is it in there? But if we look at it and if we think about it in our relationship with Christ, I think it can teach us a lot and can lead us to a deep place of devotion. Anybody have anything to comment? It is not.
All your study shows through. I was telling somebody about the way they preach, not trying to compare it to anybody else, but just bring out some of the tidbits of stuff that makes you think, how does he know that? Because Lord studies. But he just
what are some things that you are praising God for tonight? Uh, basically, Anderson ended up shooting a gun that had the wrong size shell in it, so it exploded. But he just has a sore thumb and lip. Uh, the last I heard today is that now they're thinking instead of brain bleed, it might just be pressure. Miss Mary is the one that was telling me about it, so she could probably tell you more than I could. But anything else you're thankful for or praising God for? The virus, yeah. Ava May. Ava May. Did she stay in Birmingham? Because I talked to him at like 2:30, or sent him a text, sent Jamie a text about 2:30, but she was still waiting to see a dermatologist. So 3. Okay. Well, what about any verses of scripture? Have any been meaningful to you, stuck out this week? What does it say? I can look it up. Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will hold on to you with my righteous right hand.
That's a good one to me. There's somebody that I've been praying with for, like to have a great and different, and that verse has really impacted me in the last week. I say, and I did some cards, and I write it in the card, and it's really done. Because I mean, it's so powerful. You know, God got us.
Anybody else? Well, what about prayers for Eastwood?
pray for guidance and discernment for her because this is the first time she's ever experienced this, and she's trying to do it without mom, dad looking over her shoulder. We're trying to let her, but she comes home and tells us what's going on. It really doesn't so much offer her advice, but she says, "Okay, keep it like that." But I would produce this work every time and there's like, hey, just not pray for her. She's trying and she just doesn't know what to do and doesn't want anybody holding her hand doing it.
Has anything new happened with Joyce Bronford? Anything different? I think her name here, old friend, or is it something else? I knew she had some issues with her heart.
The old friend is members of this group.
Yeah, I know that.
I talked to Bill on the election day, and he said the doctor just told her to stay in and away from all the viruses going around. It was nothing major, just cautionary with her heart issues.
Danny tell her doctor, so the doctor said it was today. Good. What's going on with Marshall? Still talking?
But Rochelle talks to Heather very probably if anything necessarily alone.
So Marvin, sure.
That's not a great idea. We had him off one time. He can come off. I mean, he's doing. His biggest thing right now is he gets mad because his sons won't let him drive the gator up to the other property by himself. So that's. Ella Ray's doing okay, Brother Aubrey's.
This is just the aftermath.
He's outside every Sunday. And I haven't been out there every Sunday, but every time I've been out there, he's been out there.
Yeah, they told her.
And the radio out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
Look at you. I don't remember your wife's birthday.
Is that your birthday? The match?
That's right.
She just posted the AOD. Yeah, I know. Getting older and older.
I know.
As long as one of us knows.
anybody have anything else under anything that's good or needs attention or?
I'm just glad you're back. I'm glad we are able to meet. I know you've been able to for a while. I'm just glad you're back. It seems like in my way to do that. We're doing okay with money wise.
I'm just thinking about, well, will we have a business meeting, financial
We-
meeting?
We're gonna start business meetings back in August.